Hello, and welcome to Street Aesthete. This is the show where we explore street view coverage of a noteworthy location, looking out for beautiful architecture and stunning scenery while I amuse myself by remarking on what we see. This is going to be the fourth part in a series I'm doing called Red Brick London, in which we explore the late Victorian and early 20th century architecture of the city, looking out in particular for buildings that feature that high iron oxide content brick that I like so much. I've got 4 locations north of the river for you today, the first of which is just northwest of Hampstead Heath, and it is Golders Green. We drop in next to some fabulous red brick buildings along the high street here. We'll be examining them in a bit more detail, and I think first of all we should see if we can find some coverage without the scaffold here so we can get the full effect of the facades. I think I like the look of this one a bit more. I mentioned in my street view exploration of the northern town of Béthune that there is so much that you can do with brick. It may be a simple building material, but there's lots you can do to ornament and add extra decoration to your buildings. Here we can see a simple inset pattern, creating a bit of extra texture to the facade here. We've got bricks arranged in an arch above the window. And indeed, if we look over here, we can see bricks alternating with perhaps limestone to create this checkerboard effect. And some more checkerboarding here as well. We've got these wonderful gables at the tops of the facades and variation as we proceed along the row. More of a rounded top here, a little bit more protrusion at the ends here. Then these dormer windows behind the gable, and then more of an echo of this design over here, then a triangular top over there. Let's revert to the latest coverage, and we'll start to move down the street. On the other side, we've got perhaps a slightly less appealing set of designs, but still distinguished in its own way. More of the checkerboard effect at the top over here, and a negative image echo over on this side. And some interesting little flourishes of curved shapes in the window frames here as well. And as we come to the other side of this clock tower cum war memorial, we can see the full effect of this row as it curves around the side of the street alongside the roundabout, with some wonderful symmetry on display here as well. The dome marking the middle point of the row, and 2 sets of triangular gables on either side, followed up by that same curve with the dormer windows behind it. I'm not sure how far the symmetry goes beyond that, but we'll take a little look down this row as well. And there's plenty to see and admire here, isn't there? A really wonderful effect. I enjoy observing all of the little details here, like this Baroque, or rather neo-Baroque, cornucopic flower and fruit design hung in a wreath made of plaster most likely around the top of the gable there. And then we've got some more neo-Baroque features, these sort of clamshell designs over the windows. Another dome here, flanked on either side by 2 sets of triangles, and then the dormer windows on either side. Yes, lots of symmetrical patterns going on here. And it's that symmetry and the regularly repeating designs with internal rhymes that really make this such an appealing and cohesive street to look at. Often in London, the ground floor shops are jumbled with all sorts of different typefaces and styles on display, with no real cohesion to be seen. But as soon as you start to ignore the ground floor and look from the first floor up, now we start to see why London is indeed one of the most beautiful cities in the world. Now, as we move further down the high street, we begin to see some newer building works, perhaps a bit less ambitious, a bit less elaborately decorated than the others that we've been looking at so far. And while there is more to see further down the high street here at Golders Green, it's at this point that we're going to leave it and move on to our next location. We're going to zoom out again and turn our attention a little bit further east to the northern end of Finsbury Park, and we're going to be taking a look at this long straight road here, Green Lanes. We'll drop in at the southern end and proceed to the top. Now, what's distinguished about this street is once again its aesthetic cohesion along a very long row of buildings. And as we head further down the street, we'll be approaching a real highlight for this area. I'm not going to give too much away yet, but let's just say it is something of a centerpiece to the long linear cake that we are going to be consuming with our eyes as we approach it. The thing that really strikes me about these facades here, I would say, is the variation in colour. Here we've got the raw red brick, if you like. This is the building material we're interested in, handsome and unadulterated. But either side of it, we've got some painted bricks here. They've been painted red, giving the raw brick a bit more of a sort of contrasting ochre appearance. And then on the other side, it's hard to say really whether it was painted intentionally, this sort of purplish colour, or whether over time the colour of the paint has sort of faded and changed, becoming more blue. Taken as a whole, the effect I would say is generally quite pleasing, the different colours, although I can't help but think that it would have been better probably if it had just been left as plain brick. And my eye is certainly drawn to this facade in particular, with its rows of 3 thin windows, each with a neoclassical column in between. And it really does have a wonderful effect when taken in all in one wide sweep. At this point, it might be worth perhaps going down one of the side streets to admire some of the residential architecture that we have here. It's sort of like a younger sibling or a companion, the residential design, to the high street design. Each with its own little unique flourish, a bit of colour, a shape perhaps, an ornamentation, just to differentiate it from its neighbour. The sequence of construction, I think, went something like this. In the late 19th century, many of the most well-to-do and affluent high streets that we see in London were built with fine red brick designs. But at the turn of the century, in the Edwardian period, the burgeoning population of the city necessitated a rapid growth in the requirement for housing stock. And so the ratio of consideration given in construction to quantity over quality began to tip slightly in quantity's favour, although the quality is certainly still here. But as the decades progressed of the 20th century, and indeed after the wars, it became increasingly difficult to justify the high cost of buildings, and that trend has proceeded to the present day, until now, in general, the ratio of quantity and quality has entirely tipped in quantity's favour. We won't get too waylaid with the side streets, but just to give you a sense of what we're dealing with here, that each one of the roads leading off either side is another beautiful etude in Edwardian design. I might just go back and take a look at this building in particular. An interesting contrast we have here between the red brick and the white and blue tiling here, certainly a later addition. And it looks as though the stucco ornamentation features above the windows were perhaps renovated or redone, as they're certainly looking a lot cleaner and fresher than others elsewhere that we see. But I really like the way here that the curlicues around the edges here are echoed in the rounded shapes above the windows. Very appealing indeed. And as we proceed along the street, we might consider it something of an amuse-bouche for the main course that we are rapidly approaching. Or perhaps I ought to say an amuse-yeux, an amusement for the eyes. We can just see the edge of the turret here for the building that I'm particularly interested in showing you. Just worth drawing attention perhaps to the twin turrets on either side of the street corners here, flanking this particular street very nicely. And now, at last, we have come to it. This is what it's all been leading up to, the Salisbury Hotel. Now, I think what I'm going to do is see if I can find some coverage where the sun hits the building just right, and here it is. Now, this is perfect. We've got some winter coverage, so we haven't got any foliage blocking the building. Of course, it is always wonderful to see trees and green leaves in a city, but we are particularly interested in viewing this building at the moment, and we've got the sun shining on it at just the right angle to bring out the shadows and the textures of the brickwork here. And we'll start on the ground floor. As I mentioned earlier, actually, while the street level facades of many buildings in London often aren't worth observing, this one I would say certainly is. We've got these neoclassical designs around the windows, these beautiful wide arches, and I'm particularly smitten with this iron-wrought text worked into the railings here in this beautiful stylish typeface. And as we now proceed upward along the building, we can see the arch from below echoed above with these little oval-shaped portholes either side, and the window frame here fanning outwards, suggestive of the Baroque-style clamshell design that we have seen elsewhere. Moving up, we have yet more of these red and white stripes that give the facade its proud, peacocking, colourful texture. And as we come to the top, we reach a handsome gable, flanked on either side, as we saw earlier down the street actually, by these little turrets, with a great sense of symmetry throughout the building. This window, and this window, the turrets, this extra gable here, and I do believe there's probably a striped chimney to be found over here on the other side also. Not exactly symmetrical, we have got a stripy chimney, but in a slightly different configuration to the other side. And actually really worth taking a look at the sun striking this row here as well. And if I take us back here, the thing that I particularly like about the row here is the way that the gentle curve of the facade sweeps round and draws your eye down across and into the row in a perfect continuation. And indeed, the regularity of the pattern that we see here, the white window frames all lined up, this red brick gap and more white window frames, topped on each facade with a gable, sort of reminds me of the effect that you get if you place two mirrors facing each other and stand in between, and when you wave at yourself in the mirror you can see each of the subsequent reflections waving in sequence. And I get something of a sense of that effect looking at this row here. Just before we move on to our next location, we'll take a few more steps down the road and take in this lovely red brick church here. Having been treated to all of the symmetry that we saw in the Salisbury, I can't help but feel that a little extra turret on the right-hand side wouldn't go amiss. Nonetheless, some handsome coloured brick and some really wonderful designs around the windows here. Let's head back out into the map. We've had Golders Green and Green Lanes. Next I'm going to take you just over to the west to this area here, which isn't even labelled on the map and doesn't have a train or tube station of its own. This is Crouch End, and we're going to drop in at this end of it, I think. Now, it isn't strictly a red brick building, but it is one that I wanted to share with you. From one church to another, I really admire this ancient looking stonework that we have here. Something about it actually reminds me a bit of the stonework in the castle at Ghent. You can take a look at my street view exploration of the Belgian city of Ghent. I'll put a card up in the top right hand corner. Anyway, we come out into Crouch End, and the first thing to point out, I think, is this very clean looking row of facades here. And the thing that I really admire about them is the consistent pattern of coloured glass that appears in each of the windows. Probably each of these is a separate flat occupied by different people, but the cohesion of the street that we get here from having those colours in common really appeals to me. Now generally we'll be heading off over in this direction, but I just want to take a moment to head back over here, and we've got two things to look at. First of all, the Railway Tavern. I'm always a sucker for some mock Tudor half timber beaming, although of course we can see that where in a true medieval building the timber would have been filled in with wattle and daub, here it's filled in with red brick, which is what we're here for. The other thing we've got to look at is this row just here. And the thing that I love about it is the way each of the facades is separated by this little striped column. We'll just see if we've got some coverage with the sun on these buildings. Yes, we do, and isn't that just wonderful? Again, getting the shadows and the highlights from the way the sun hits the buildings. And we've got these beautiful clamshell designs once again. Absolutely gorgeous. And we're going to proceed along the high street, ignoring as best we can this ugly monstrosity. This is the sort of thing that I'm talking about when I say quantity over quality. But just here, we've got the beautiful clock tower, and indeed the late Victorian street beyond. And what a fabulous effect that is. We'll take a closer look at that in a moment, but we'll just give this side of the street its due diligence. We've got, again, a coloured glass pattern shared throughout the windows on this facade. I suspect that this building is older, and the ones we were looking at round the corner may be a bit newer, but have taken cues from what we see here. A closer look at the clock tower itself. (1895). The 1880s and 90s truly were a golden age for British architecture, I'd say. I'd like to get into the coverage on the other side of the road if possible, where we could see the sun on these buildings. But while we're here, actually, isn't it lovely to see this red and white striped awning underneath the buildings, very much echoing with the stripes that we see in the brickwork? The thing I particularly wanted to mention about these is these inset balconies at the tops of each of the buildings. I think if you had a flat up there, it would be a fantastic place of an evening to sit and enjoy a coffee, read a book. Yeah. A really, really picturesque street. And actually there's perhaps a bit more of the sort of white plaster stucco on display here than the red brick. It really is, for me, the combination of the red and the white that makes all the difference. As much as I love the colour of the red brick here, I would say perhaps the ratio of a paler colour to red is a little bit off. Maybe there's a bit too much red. It's when you get the ratio just right, like we have here, that it really stands out and looks gorgeous. And we make our way around the corner here. Another extremely cohesive street scene. See if we can find some sunnier coverage without the scaffold. Okay, the scaffold has moved. But perhaps that suggests that over the course of several years, and here it is again moving, these buildings have all been lovingly restored so that Crouch End can put its best foot forward. And here I think is the first one where, the scaffold is over here, but we can definitely take a good view of the whole row just here. Really an extraordinary neighbourhood. Here, on this side of the street, there's definitely more red than white, but I think somehow it's still working. I'll have to tweak this theory of mine about the ratio of red to white in the perfect Victorian building. Interesting, I wonder what happened here. It's possible that a bomb was dropped during the Blitz just here, and this had to be rebuilt, or it's possible that part of it was demolished and this newer addition was put in. We can definitely see that this is newer, it's less ornamented, but at least it's taken the cues from the surrounding semicircular shapes that we've got here. Well, I really could admire Crouch End for hours on end. And if we're not careful, I'm going to. I'm now drawn in by the beautiful wood panelling of the window casements here, the beautiful door, the iron railings in the entrance. But I do have one more location that I would like to share with you for this video. So, reluctantly, I'm going to leave Crouch End behind and take you just down the road to our fourth and final location. It is Muswell Hill. We're going to start on Fortis Green Road. I think I'd like to just take a look at the street as a whole from here. A really lovely sort of colonnaded veranda here on the first floor. Something a little bit more sort of stolid and squat, we might say, about this row compared to in Crouch End, where the buildings were perhaps just ever so slightly taller and thinner, and some lovely detail above the windows there. And yet another row of facades with a distinguishing feature. These are much more sort of squared off, much more rectilinear looking. But the way that each facade is separated by the chimneys definitely gives the visual impression of sort of looking at treetops. Even though this is very much a man-made environment, we still get a sense of the natural world coming through in the design. And the sun is hitting the facades here perfectly. Really very beautiful. St James's Parade. And just a little bit of colour variation here as well, going a long way. This pastel green, yellow and blue, white, and then the good old dependable brick red. A handsome church here, with some great detailing around the windows. And a marvellous spire. And we're going to come round the corner towards the final part of our exploration of red brick London for today. And as we peer into the distance down the street, we can really start to see the extent of the ambition of the late 19th century architects and builders who brought this street into being. An unusual church here. We've got this joyfully jumbled stonework in amongst the red brick and tiles, and some simple yet elegant stained glass. But of course, this is no longer a church, it's now a steakhouse. It's a pity to see a church repurposed like this, but at least we still get to retain the building itself. Now that is a truly eye-boggling row. Unlike some of the other rows of facades in streets we've seen elsewhere, there is next to no variation, I think, in the design of each of these. And that has an effect in itself. You may have heard me say previously on this channel that I dislike uniformity in architecture, and that certainly goes for large, modern concrete blocks of flats with repeating cells of rectilinear shapes. But here, the eye is tricked, the uniformity is disguised by the contrasting white and red of each of these little sections in between the windows. It may not be apparent from the coverage, and probably won't be apparent if you're not familiar with London, but here at Muswell Hill, we're actually at quite a high elevation. And that also, I would say, gives these streets a particular character. There's this sort of feeling of remoteness, or of being in an exclusive place, because in order to be up here, you have to have climbed all the way up the hill, which we're going to see in a moment. Not to mention that, like Crouch End, there isn't a dedicated station or tube stop for Muswell Hill, which does set it apart as almost like a separate village within London. Really, really incredible. Just splendid, isn't it? It's quite probable that the layout of the streets here has existed for centuries, and I wouldn't be surprised if this roundabout had at one point been something of a focal point for the village, a meeting place. But as the city developed, the town planners of the Victorian era decided that they would decorate these streets with the many handsome facades we see here. A New Jerusalem for the 19th century, if you will. It's just such an incredible feat, I think, to have conceived of this place and built this cohesive red brick environment across all of these separate streets. This is what it's all about for me and the Street Aesthete channel. If we're honest, this is what it boils down to. It's sunlight hitting red brick, with just the right ratio of red to white on display, with a handsome and elaborate gable on top. Give me that, and I'm happy. Looking over to the other side of the road, we've got a perhaps newer looking building here, and then this rather glaring gap. Once again, I wonder if it may have been that in the 1940s a bomb fell right here, destroying what may have been a companion, a mirror image of the street here. And while something new was built in brick, it wasn't built to the same specifications or with the same money available for the building project as the rest of the town here. I just love the continuity of the white stripes all the way across the facade here, going on around the corner and then continuing on the other side of the road over here. The vision that must have gone into planning all of this construction is just so impressive and so beyond any of the mediocre ambition that goes into most modern construction. And we've got, to match the red brick streets, a beautiful red brick church. This one with a fabulously crenellated top and with the little gargoyles sticking out. Once again, a similar sort of simple but elegant design to the windows here. This looks like a well-attended church. And so the last thing that we're going to come to is Muswell Hill itself, which is just down here. And the reason that I'm taking you over here has got nothing to do with red brick. It's simply for the view. Now, there's actually quite a famous set of houses just down the road here. And it's famous because if you ever read a news article about the London housing market, it tends to be that a stock photo taken just here will be used as the thumbnail for that article. And in particular, it's this set of houses just here. And if you can get your camera set up just right, you can get all of these facades sweeping downwards, leading the eye towards the city sprawling beyond. And we won't dwell on these for too long, just long enough so that we have a chance to comment on the beautiful designs in the eaves of each of the buildings here. Each one of them unique. And perhaps with some sort of coat of arms in them as well. I think we may have seen an English and a Scottish flag back there. So concludes this 4th episode of Red Brick London. There are plenty of other places around London, north and south of the river, that I'd like to take you for red brick architecture, so why not subscribe to the channel to make sure that you don't miss the next one? Why not leave me a like as well to help spread the street aesthete message? If you've enjoyed the music that you hear in this video, then take a look at my first channel, which is where I upload all of my original music.